All right, so have you ever, like, tried to hide from something, but, like, you just can't hide from it?
Oh, yeah,
Like, say your Monday morning to-do list?
definitely.
Well, today's deep dive is gonna take us back to a time when people were trying to do just that, but the thing they were hiding from was, how should we say, a bit more explosive.
A little bit.
I'm Hari Jagiri, and I'll be your host for this trip back in time.
And I'm Kimi here to maybe bust some myths about the whole duck and cover era.
Got it. So we're diving into this duck and cover film. It's from 1951, and we've got the film itself and its Wikipedia page as our sources.
Okay.
Now, this film is, like, iconic. Even if you haven't seen it, you've probably seen that image of Bert the Turtle ducking into his shell.
Oh, for sure.
But how much do we really know about what was happening back then? Like, what was going on in the world that made duck and cover, like, a thing?
Well, we're talking 1951, and the world was kind of holding its breath.
Yeah.
World War II had ended a few years before, but the threat of, like, global conflict hadn't really gone away. It just morphed into this new terrifying thing.
Right. The Cold War.
Yeah.
The U.S. and the Soviet Union both had nuclear weapons, and they were locked in this ideological struggle. And, nobody knew if or when those bombs might actually be used.
Yeah. So basically, everyone's just living with this, like, constant fear of nuclear annihilation.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to even imagine, really.
Right.
And so that's where duck and cover comes in.
So what was the real reason behind making this film and, like, showing it to everyone, especially to kids? I mean, was it just to teach them, or was there something else going on?
I think, at least on the surface, it was meant to be educational.
Okay.
The government was trying to figure out how to prepare people, especially children, for a possible nuclear attack. I mean, this was before the internet, before 24/7 news. So duck and cover was a way to get these basic survival tips out to a lot of people.
That makes sense. So you have this very real and terrifying threat.
Yeah.
And the government's trying to, tell people about it and give them something they can do in a situation that honestly sounds pretty uncontrollable. But I'm curious about the actual advice they gave in the film. Like, what were people supposed to do if they saw that atomic flash?
Well, the instructions were pretty simple. First, you had to see the flash, and the film makes a point of saying it would be super bright, even brighter than the sun.
Wow.
Because that flash was the first warning. Then, as fast as you could, you had to duck and cover under something, a desk, a table, anything to protect you.
Okay.
The film even shows people, like, pressing themselves up against walls. The idea was to get low and out of sight of the blast.
So it was all about avoiding that first blast wave and the radiation.
Huh.
But could that really save you from a nuclear explosion? I mean, we all know how powerful those things are.
Yeah, that is the big question, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, people have been debating duck and cover for decades. Some people see it as a good attempt at offering some protection, even if it was a bit naive. And then others see it as more of a propaganda tool that was meant to make people feel safe and not really tell them how bad a nuclear war would be.
It's really interesting how something like a civil defense film can create such different opinions.
Definitely.
I think that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. Before we get into the film's impact and what it left behind, let's talk about Bert the Turtle.
Ah, yes. Bert, the iconic turtle who knew how to protect himself. He was the perfect mascot for the film's message.
Totally.
I mean, turtles are known for their shells, and Bert used his shell to show the duck and cover technique. It was a simple, visual way to get the message across, especially to children who probably didn't understand nuclear physics.
Yeah, using a cartoon turtle to teach kids about surviving a nuclear attack is pretty unique. What do you think was the reason for that?
Well, for one thing, animation was a popular way to make educational films at the time.
Right.
It was engaging, easy to understand, and less scary than showing actual explosions. Plus, Bert was relatable.
Right.
He wasn't a superhero. He was just a regular turtle trying to stay safe.
Yeah, he was like the everyman, or I guess every turtle of the nuclear age.
Exactly. And it shows how effective the film was that Bert became such a famous cultural icon.
That's a great point. He's almost more recognizable than the film itself. And speaking of lasting impact, there's something on the film's Wikipedia page that I found pretty interesting. It says that duck and cover was chosen to be preserved in the National Film Registry in 2004. Why is that a big deal?
Being chosen for the National Film Registry is a huge honor.
For sure.
It means that the Library of Congress thinks the film is important to our culture, history, or art, and that it should be saved for future generations.
Okay.
In the case of Duck and Cover, it shows how much the film has impacted American culture. Whether it was a good survival strategy or not, the film gives a valuable look into the fears and realities of the Cold War era.
And being recognized by the Library of Congress really makes it a historical artifact, right?
Absolutely. It takes Duck and Cover from a simple educational film to a significant piece of American history, something worth studying and thinking about. It reminds us that even the most ordinary things from the past can teach us a lot about who we are and how we got here.
That's well said. So we have this film, Duck and Cover, that was made because of the anxieties of the Cold War.
Right.
It features Bert the Turtle, who taught a generation of kids how to well duck and cover. And even though there's debate about whether it really worked, it's earned a place in the National Film Registry, there's definitely a lot to unpack here. But before we start analyzing the film itself, let's take a minute to think about the bigger picture of the Cold War and the very real threat of nuclear war that was hanging over the world.
Okay. It's amazing how this whole ducking and covering thing, meant for that specific time still kind of sticks with us today, maybe in ways we don't even realize.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Like, we still face threats, right? Maybe not mushroom clouds, but things like cyber attacks that can mess up everything, climate change, and even those pandemics that seem to come out of nowhere and change life as we know it.
Exactly. And even though ducking and covering wouldn't really help with those things, the idea of being prepared and being able to bounce back when things are uncertain, well, that's something we always deal with as humans. It's like this need to feel like we have some control, even when things are totally out of our hands.
Makes you wonder how we've changed the way we get ready for and handle these threats since the Cold War. I mean, we've gone from those government films and announcements to like a constant stream of information from everywhere.
It's a whole different world now. Back then, duck and cover was like this single message straight from the government. Now we're dealing with all this information coming from all over the place, and we have to figure out what's real and what's not. It's a lot more responsibility on us.
You know, that actually reminds me of something we talked about earlier, the debate about whether duck and cover really worked or if it was just propaganda. Isn't that same debate happening now with all this information overload and fake news?
Totally. We're still asking those basic questions like, who can we trust? What information is reliable? How do we even start to understand a world that's so complicated and unpredictable, where information is thrown at us from every direction? It's like duck and cover, even though it's from the past, shows us some anxieties that we still have today.
It's like the film, whether it meant to or not, has become this warning about how powerful information is.
Yeah.
How it can be used to teach us, but also to trick us, to make us feel safe, but also to control us.
And it makes us think about what our responsibility is, both as individuals and as a society, to really look at the information we take in and be careful about what we choose to believe.
Speaking of responsibility, there's another thing about duck and cover that I wanted to talk about. It was made specifically for kids. Makes me wonder how we've changed the way we prepare younger generations for all the uncertainty they'll face in their lives.
That's a really important point. It seems like we've moved on from simple solutions like duck and cover. And now we understand that the world is complicated. We know that young people need to learn how to think critically, not just follow instructions.
Right. We want to give them the tools to decide for themselves what information is good, to make smart choices, to be involved in shaping their own future. And in a way, isn't that its own kind of preparation? Giving them the skills to deal with an uncertain world instead of just telling them what to do when things get tough.
Exactly. And I think that change is really powerful. It's about encouraging them to be active and involved instead of just obeying. It's like we're saying, hey, the world is messy and confusing, but we believe you can handle it. Here are some things to help you along the way.
I like that. It's a much more positive message than just saying duck and cover and hope for the best. It tells young people that they have the power to make choices, that they have a role in shaping their own lives. And that's a much more hopeful message than anything in duck and cover.
And it shows that as a society, we're starting to see how important it is to think critically, to question things, and to look at things from different angles. Because as we've seen, the world is rarely as straightforward as duck and cover made it seem.
It really feels like this whole conversation about duck and cover, where it came from, what it was trying to do, and how it stuck with us, all comes back to this basic human need to deal with uncertainty. You know, those big, scary threats that can feel so overwhelming, and figure out how to make sense of it all.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe that's the biggest thing we can take away from looking at duck and cover. It goes beyond just the actual ducking and covering and makes us think about these bigger questions of how we as people and as a society deal with fear and uncertainty and the fact that our lives can be disrupted at any time.
We've looked at the history, dug into the film's message and its star Bert the Turtle, and even connected it to what worries us today and the challenges of figuring out what's true in a world flooded with information. What I find really interesting is how this film, even though it's simple and maybe even a little naive, has made people talk and debate for so long.
Yeah, it shows you the power of stories, how Even things from the past that seem ordinary can start these amazing conversations that connect different generations and make us think about who we are and how we got here. It's like looking in a mirror and seeing our shared anxieties and hopes.
And, it leaves us with this really thought-provoking question. If someone were to make Duck and Cover today, what would it be like? What would it tell us about what people are afraid of? What advice would it give? And maybe most importantly, who or what would be its mascot? Would we see some digital character showing us how to stay safe online? Or maybe a tough little chameleon that can change to show how we need to adapt to a world that's always changing?
Those are great questions, and I think it'd be really cool to hear what our listeners think. What do you think would be the modern version of Duck and Cover? Tell us your ideas on social media using hashtag #DeepDiveDuckAndCover. We're really curious to see what you come up with.
And with that, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the world of Duck and Cover. It's been a fascinating trip through history, culture, and the way humans always seem to have both hope and doubt when we face the unknown. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep those brains working.